Welcome to the program. Lots of news to report today, starting with City Light Chief Gary Zarker, who this week lost the battle to keep his job. A majority of council members on Thursday announced they will vote against reconfirming the embattled utility head. Why didn't Greg Nichols get his way on this one? We'll ask our first guest, Deputy Mayor Tim Cease, and later the City Hall reporters for both the Seattle Times and PI give us their take on this power play. What was going on behind the scenes and what's next? A good lineup, a good topic, but first this recap of the week's news, beginning with the Zarker reconfirmation story. On Thursday, Seattle's utility chief sat and listened during the final of 4 hearings about his tenure. Though most of the public testified in support of reconfirmation, most of the council has now decided against it. 6 of the 9 say they will vote to remove Zarker when the final roll call is made on Monday. After yesterday's public hearing, all but one council member spoke at length on Zarker's performance. Margaret Pagler was the strongest voice in defense of the utility chief, saying it's simply unfair to blame him for the hefty price hikes resulting from the Western power crisis.
You know, like the 9/11 attacks, it's easy to go back and say, the FBI should have caught a clue, the CIA should have caught a clue. But in fact, the energy crisis and the California fiasco were criminal attacks. And if anything, there was not a failure of prudent leadership. There was probably a failure of imagination. None of us imagined, and nobody in the electric utility industry imagined how badly things could go wrong. The leadership strength that Superintendent Zarker has shown, particularly in the regional and national arena, versus the management weaknesses that are identified in the Vantage report and that many of us who are close to the bureaucracy know well, that calculus will be weighed differently by all of us as decision makers. I respect that. But given the critical importance of leadership on the national stage now, and Gary's proven credibility in that arena, I will vote for confirmation.
Pagler's argument, however, did not win the day. Rather, the prevailing view was that Zarker has come up short as a leader and doesn't deserve the benefit of the doubt. Here's Jim Compton.
About Gary Zarker, I find him a smart and capable public servant. I have enjoyed knowing Gary. I think he's given tremendously to this city. And the issue before us, though, is whether, on balance, he's the right person to lead City Light in the future. And based on the performance and my standard of whether prudent judgments were made to protect ratepayers, I've concluded that we need someone else. And I very sadly will vote not to reconfirm Gary Zarker.
The final vote on reconfirmation is Monday, but the outcome is now clear. Gary Zarker, the highest paid city employee, has lost his job. We will talk more about this big blow to the mayor's utility head later in the program. On now to the monorail, which may not cost car owners as much as they thought, at least not at first. Officials say they will wait until next year to issue upwards of $1 billion in bonds for the project. That means this year the monorail tax won't need to be as high. For a time, monorail leaders wanted to sell bonds right away to take advantage of the low interest rates, but because they won't need the money until they are closer to breaking ground, the bonds can wait. This also from the world of monorail. The city's Landmarks Preservation Board will soon decide whether the current monorail columns along Fifth Avenue deserve historic designation. If so, that may mean they would have to be used for the new line. Current monorail officials, however, oppose the landmark status, saying the existing columns won't work for the new project. Now, an update. As we've reported before, the so-called Save Our Creeks citizen initiative collected enough signatures to appear on this fall's ballot, but that's not the end of the story. Richard Conlon and Heidi Wills have drafted what they say is a better alternative. They propose that it be placed on the ballot also alongside the citizen initiative to give voters another choice. Most council members, however, are skeptical of that idea, among them Margaret Pagler and Peter Steinbrook.
I'm concerned about the assumption that somehow creek daylighting is a wonderful thing and therefore we should do it, and that we can write legislation that makes it work.
Has this been costed out beyond the $1.5 million that would be raised in the way that you described. It does obligate the city to do things beyond the 1.5 million. I think we're already spending around 9 or 10 million a year on creek restoration currently, and I would raise the question, how does this fit with our other urgent priorities in the city?
The death toll from the Rhode Island nightclub fire stands at just under 100. Here in Seattle, on any given weekend, dozens of venues sponsor live band performances. What's being done to make sure the tragedy can't happen here? Council members heard from fire officials on that very point this week. Jan Drago asked, are Seattle's loud, smoky, unlit nightclubs a fire hazard waiting to happen?
Talking primarily about younger people, dark drinking. Maybe there needs to be additional regulations under those circumstances than, say, a theater and other kinds of public venues.
And that's exactly what we're going to be looking at. The goal here is to go out and take a look at the decorations, take a look at the exiting width, take a look at how a lot of clubs try to do what we call the choke down so that they can control people getting in for free and for people coming in to make sure that the choke down does not inhibit their exiting.
And now something that developers around town are applauding. The council is considering extending the time a master use permit is valid. Right now, such a permit is good for only 1 year. But what if a builder doesn't get around to constructing a project in that time? Developers then have to reapply, causing delays and higher costs. The council may increase the validity period to something more like 3 years. One small developer told council members recently why such a change is so important.
And in my land use practice, a lot of what I'm doing now is struggling to keep desirable projects alive. Projects that have, and it's not always the big ones like Millennium and IDX, it's also some real desirable multifamily projects in the neighborhood that have put a lot of money into design review and into their MUPs, but they're going to at risk of losing the permit and losing the project.
Now time for our neighborhood roundup. Here's what's making news across the city this week. The famous hat and boots down in Georgetown are on the move. This week, workers began dismantling the landmark and transporting it 4 blocks away, where it will be refurbished, reassembled, and redisplayed permanently in a city park. The Hat and Boots, a fixture since 1955, was for years a premium Tex gas station. For a time, it sold more fuel than any other store in the state. Next up, Cleveland High School in the South End, which is just about to be sliced up like a pizza. Next year, district officials will create 4 smaller schools out of the one large facility. Cleveland's student suspension and dropout rates are high. The move toward the small school format is an attempt to better serve students. And now to Magnolia, where residents there are set to see alternatives for a new Magnolia Bridge. The existing structure was badly hurt in the 2001 earthquake. It has since been shorn up, but officials say that it is only a temporary fix and will need to be totally replaced to be able to withstand another big shake. And finally, this news for all neighborhoods around town. As warm weather approaches, so do mosquitoes and the threat of the West Nile virus. No human infections have yet been reported in Washington, but Mayor Greg Nickels doesn't want to take any chances. He has applied with the state for permission to use limited insecticides on Seattle-owned property if necessary. And now for our city Inside Out calendar for the upcoming few weeks. 3 important monorail meetings to announce, where leaders will display their recommendation for the best route and best station locations. Here are the places and dates. Ballard and Inner Bay on Monday, March 17th. For Seattle Center, Belltown, Downtown, and Pioneer Square, they will meet for their part of the route on Tuesday, March 18th. Finally, Sodo and West Seattle are set to discuss the plan on March 19th. 2 district council meetings to announce. Delridge will meet on the 19th, and the Southeast District Council will meet on the 20th. Also coming up, the Seattle Police Department will hold 3 meetings on the topic of profiling. The first is on March 11th at Park Place. On the 19th, the meeting is at the Miller Community Center. And finally, on the 26th at the Klondike Museum. If you would like more information about any of these events, we direct you to our website at www.seattlechannel.org. And finally today, artwork in the new City Hall. Some planned projects for the soon-to-be completed building didn't make it past the art filter this week. One nixed installation would have put microphones in the walls of City Hall, taping the creaks and groans of the building, and then replaying them in some of the public spaces. Not too much of a surprise, I guess, that it was thrown out. Hard to imagine the mayor and city council wanting hidden recording devices all over the new building. And that wraps up our news. Stay with us. The downfall of Gary Zarker is our interview topic today. What happened to Greg Nichols' nominee? We talk with Deputy Mayor Tim Cease and later the City Hall reporters for the Seattle Times and PI with their takes on this mini drama. Stay with us. We're back in a moment. We now welcome Tim Cease. He is the Deputy Mayor for the City of Seattle. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me back.
Why did this nomination not go your way?
Well, that's a complicated answer for that question. Obviously council members felt they wanted to change at City Light, and they all had various reasons. Some of it going back to the energy crisis, some of it because they felt management was not competent. It was various reasons.
Do you sense any revenge, any payback? I mean, here's a council that, at least a few on record saying, this is a strong mayor, you gotta stand up to him. And was this in any way an attempt to do that?
Well, I've heard that mentioned from various sources. I'm hoping not, because that's outside the rules of the game. I believe when you take on somebody's reputation and their career and use that as a weapon against the mayor. So I'm hoping that wasn't the reason behind this.
You had meetings with all 9 of them over the course of this whole process. What did you hear? What were the biggest concerns, and why weren't you able to sway 5 votes?
Well, again, what I heard was the issues around the energy crisis, the decision by the council back in the late 90s to sell the Centralia coal plant, their decision to go on the market, to buy power after that sale. I also heard issues about how management had worked with them over the years, and there are some concerns about communication. Interestingly, though, all those decisions during the energy crisis, the decisions leading up to the energy crisis, were ones that the council was intimately involved in and had approved. So that I found the most interesting part of the decision process.
And you weren't able to sway at least 2 more. You got 3.
No, I wasn't, obviously.
There was some claim, I mean, Judy Nicastro expressed it, but you heard it from some others too, that this was a hard push, full court press lobbying job. I mean, no doubt you folks were foursquare behind this guy. You called in some shits, I bet. You had a whole bunch of people testify, write letters. You supported your guy, and no one can fault you for that, except it might have been too excessive, some say. Was it too much in retrospect?
No, I don't accept that. When we put someone up for nomination to a department director's job, it is our responsibility to support that nomination and to ensure that we try and get them confirmed. I will say that there was a tremendous number of people that came to testify, send letters. If you look at the caliber of those people, they're not the people that show up because the mayor says you got to be here. They're people that felt strongly about Gary's performance and his value to the community and to the utility. Well, you don't put words in their mouths for that purpose.
It is amazing. I mean, if you look over the course of the 4 public hearings, clearly an overwhelming majority of those who testified were in support of reconfirmation.
Right.
And I assume, though I haven't seen, that emails and letters and other correspondence and other testimony was
About
similar.
2 to 1 in favor of Gary.
Why then, if here's the People's Council responding to the folks, why then did they go against a 2 to 1 majority of testifiers?
You'll have to ask council members, and I presume the voters will be asking council members that question this fall too. I think Councilmember Compton brought up the fact that it's their job to hold the superintendent accountable. I accept that. The mayor accepts that. We respect that. But Jim also mentioned that the voters will hold the council accountable for their actions on City Light, and I think that's true. I think that that will happen this fall.
Will you, do you or the mayor intend to run people against some of the people who voted against?
No, but we will be, you know, as we always are, we'll be involved in the campaign season this fall, but we're not pursuing that strategy.
Speaking of Jim Compton, he gave a pretty impassioned plea that his decision seemed to be affected more by kind of post-energy crisis problems. That is, he held a lot of weight on the fact that City Light hasn't hired a chief operating officer, a COO, something that was recommended in several of the audits that have happened since the energy crisis. That was a big factor for him, and a couple other council members talked about kind of post-crisis behavior of Gary Zarker and City Light. Do you wish, in other words, they were willing to give you a pass on the Western energy crisis. It's been since then that there are concerns. Do you wish you had hired a COO, that is to say, last November, December? Sounds like you could have got Compton's vote by just doing that.
No, I don't. And I know the mayor doesn't feel that way. In December, the council sent us a letter laying out about 8 conditions that they wanted us to meet for them to consider Gary's confirmation when it came up. The first item on that list was an evaluation of City Light's management team, and that was due to them by February 28th. And then by June 30th, they wanted an action plan for how to strengthen that management team. Now, the consultant report that was criticized at the council hearing was that February 28th delivery of the report on the management team. And
you met your deadline.
We made our deadline. The next deadline was the end of June, and that was when we were planning with working with the council on implementation of a COO structure, if that's what came back from the consultant's report. You don't just go out on the street and check the want ads and find somebody that's a COO for the 9th largest public utility in the country. That has to be a thoughtful decision and a recruitment for filling that kind of job.
What did you and what did the mayor learn from this reconfirmation process?
Interesting question. It's just happened, so I haven't had a lot of time to reflect on it. We're here the day after. You know, I think the reflection in one regard is we're very proud of the work we did to support Gary. Gary is a valued member of the cabinet for the mayor, and I think the mayor's demonstration of his support for a director sends a strong message to the rest of the government and to the public that he is a mayor that will stand behind his people, and when he believes their performance merits it, will stand behind their performance. I think that's what the public expects from a leader.
How disruptive will this be? That was the big claim by many who testified that if you get rid of Gary Zarker, chaos reigns, in effect.
Well,
is that too much of a doomsday scenario? I mean, there are other folks out there that are good, that are qualified, that can take up the leadership here, aren't there?
I think Gary's management team will do fine in continuing the work at City Light to keep us on track for meeting the performance goals that the mayor set out for them. I
mean as he transitions out?
As we transition out. City Light will not flounder, and we will not allow it to go into some tailspin. I think what will be difficult, as the PI I think pointed out this morning in some interviews with industry experts, the recruitment of a new superintendent will be a difficult task in this environment.
Because?
It's a politicized environment. Most of the type of utility executives we'll be looking at, some of them will be private sector, some of them will be public sector, but they will, you know, as top executives will be looking at the political environment, the governance environment within which they will have to operate. And this sends a message that this is a difficult environment right now.
With that, we end. Thanks for being here.
Thanks.
Tim Cease is the Deputy Mayor for the City of Seattle. Stay with us. Up next, 2 City Hall reporters talk about this somewhat surprising vote. When we continue, stay with us. We now welcome Jim Bruner. He is a reporter with the Seattle Times, and Kathy Milady, a reporter with the Seattle PI. Welcome to you both.
Hi, thank you.
Gary Zarker is now gone. Did that surprise you, the vote yesterday, Kathy?
It did surprise me somewhat. I was surprised by this decision of Jan Drago and also Richard Conlin's decision of no faith in the superintendent.
What about Compton?
I think his position was pretty clear all along. He was looking very closely at the operations of City Light for a long time. He raised a lot of questions. He was the push behind getting the council to bring the Vantage audit here to town to take a close look, a professional look at City Light. No, I wasn't surprised by his.
How did you look at the votes going into it?
I didn't honestly know the outcome.
I mean, no one was telling you off the record even?
Some people were saying that they thought that there were enough votes to get rid of Gary, but people were still making up their mind as of the last day. I think Peter Steinbrück said, I'm going to sleep on it the night before when I talked to him. So I didn't know. I was in suspense through that whole meeting while each council member gave their speech. Several, I didn't know which way they were going to go, like Richard Conlin, for example. Jan Drago didn't necessarily know which way.
It was high drama. I mean, you don't get. I mean, we were all watching our TVs, and you folks were there live.
The council held their votes very close to the vest this time.
Do you think that any of the revenge factor was going on here? You hear that? Here's a council who some will say they were burned last fall by the mayor on the budget and some other strong, pressure by the mayor. This was their chance to say, hey, we're relevant too. Any of that you detect, Kathy?
I don't think it was so much revenge. I think it was maybe a little bit more of the sideshow that was orchestrated by the mayor's office, the huge parade of support for Gary Zarker that the mayor's office rallied and asked to come and testify at the 4 public hearings. The testimony that was heard by the city council was so polarized. Gary's supporters were very clear and very vocal. On the other hand, there were ratepayers and citizens and some employees who had serious city criticisms.
Still overwhelmingly in support of Gary.
Absolutely. Well, yes.
Jim Bruner, did that surprise you? I mean, how much testimony there was in support of him, and then the council goes against that, and thoughts on revenge?
Well, I guess on revenge, it seemed from the speeches that the council members made yesterday that they took this really seriously as an issue of leadership about City Light. But Council President Peter Steinbrück did also say it did also send a message that the council could stand up to the mayor and even in the face of public pressure. And as far as the testimony goes, I mean, I think that Gary Zarker had a lot of support, genuine support out there among his employees and some of the labor unions and some utility leaders. I also think the mayor was out, scrambling around trying to get everybody who he might be able to convince to show up and pressure the council. And the morning of the vote, the King County Labor Council sent an email to the city council members saying, hey, we're tracking this vote. It's important to us. And they were, of course, supporting Gary, and that caught some council members by surprise.
Tracking meaning they're gonna take it up in this election.
It'll be an issue that they consider
when they decide who to endorse.
Council members run for re-election, and 5 of them are up for re-election this year.
Was it too hard a push? Did the mayor overdo it on this one? From what you have heard from council members.
It seems like, from what I have heard from council members, that it probably was overdone. But I think ultimately the council considered all of the issues very carefully. They thought very clearly about what they wanted in the superintendent of City Light. They wanted somebody who was responsive, somebody who wasn't defensive, somebody who was enthusiastic, who brought them information in a clear and digestible way. City council members are not utility experts. They have a lot of issues, some very complex on their plates. They can't delve into all the risks of buying power at this price, selling at this price, what to do. They have to rely on the superintendent. And I think the council, at least 3, 4, 5 of them, lost faith in Gary's ability to bring them that information.
What is it, Jim? You both have interviewed Gary Zarker many times. You do get a sense, a couple people very publicly support him, Margaret Pageler and Heidi Wills. I would say Richard McIver was kind of lukewarm yes vote. All the rest knows. You hear from them, there's this style to him and this style to City Light. Describe more what they have said about him and what you know.
Well, Gary Zarker has kind of risen through the ranks of city government, both as a manager, but he's always been regarded as sort of a political animal, a political player. And when he's gone from department to department, he's brought people with him, each time. And I think there was a view by some that he, kind of was interested in surrounding himself with the same people and, creating almost a PR campaign that was more about making the utility look good than always presenting all of the information. And a lot of council members felt that he was overly defensive.
You heard that too.
That he is defensive, that he comes across as defensive, yes, absolutely.
And difficult to get information from.
Yes.
But to be fair, what Gary has said numerous times is that, I'm defensive because, crooks took City Light to the cleaners during the energy crisis, and he's very passionate about that. So.
Interesting that a couple of the council members, Compton being the most notable, talk about things that happened really after the energy crisis. All these audits were done, and then the question was kind of implementing the audits and the recommendations and the fight over which recommendations were worthy and et cetera, et cetera. Compton said yesterday that one of the big things for him was you didn't hire a CEO. It was really clear we need a COO, Chief Operating Officer. Our audit said that. Some of the other audits have said that. You want to commission even another audit that says that we probably should hire a COO. Some much more recent decisions could have swayed a few council members.
I think that's absolutely true. I think the energy crisis and the fallout from that could have been forgiven and forgotten if Gary had come to the council and said, look, this is what went wrong. Let's talk about it. Let's get some loss limits in place. Let's, get me some help. Get me a COO so that we can get the strategic plan laid out. We've got to get, cracking on this. And that didn't happen. And the council asked for some of these documents, a work plan, a strategic plan, and I think they had the feeling that they almost had to drag it out of them.
Mm-hmm. Jim?
Well, City Light did respond to the audit and to some of the criticism and did bring forward a work plan and said, here's what we're going to do, and really did move forward on a lot of the recommendations. But the council, I think some members of the council felt that even though City Light was saying we're responding to you, that it never felt like City Light really wanted to fully respond, and that they would only go halfway, and that the council had to kind of pull them all the rest of the way, and that some people didn't like that.
And that seemed to sway at least a couple people. Quick here,
so.
We've got about 30 seconds. How hard is it going to be finding a replacement, Kathy?
I think that's a great question. No doubt Gary was a good superintendent. I think it's going to be a matter of money. They're going to have to come up with at least a $200,000 or more salary for the new person.
Jim?
Well, I'm not sure how the utility business works in terms of searching for a new executive, but there are people out there, I'm sure, and I agree that the city's going to have to probably pay more than they paid Gary. And the mayor's people believe that there could be a problem because the last superintendent just got kicked out the door, so that might scare some people away. I guess we'll have to see.
Yeah, but he this isn't the first cabinet member for Greg Nichols who has gotten the boot,
right?
And he's been able to replace them.
Right.
I got to move on there. Thank you so much for coming, Kathy Milady, Jim Bruner, both City Hall reporters.
Thank you very much.
We thank you all for watching. Join us next week for another edition of City Inside Out. Until then, on behalf of our talented studio crew here, I'm C.R. Douglas. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.